All right, so with these cuts, we have a running tally of cuts for our Doge series. So with these cuts, and in addition to the cuts that we've already made in this series, what's our total?
Yeah, so if Congress was to step in and say, we're going to end this program, that's $2 billion that we can return to the taxpayer. And so that would bring us up to a total of $549.5 billion in total savings this entire series so far. It's a lot of money.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. I think so, especially if you're hanging around Washington, D.C. too long. I mean, state capitals too, but especially D.C. The dollar amounts are pretty astronomical. But I mean, I think we're talking over $500 billion at the moment.
That's right.
That is not nothing. I mean, that's a lot of money that can make. I mean, the number of issues that we could address and solve if we redeployed that money, or the amount of relief that average taxpayers could experience.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. We've started a series called Big Ideas for Smaller Government. And the idea for the series is to talk about a federal government department and ways to cut spending to reach our goal of cutting $2 trillion. As we share our ideas, we want to hear yours. And you can submit those at dogeidea.com. Today, we're focusing on the Department of Energy. When you think about the Department of Energy, or DOE, you might think about oil, gas, and green energy. But do you also picture scientists in a lab wearing lab coats and with nuclear reactors? The DOE's history can be traced all the way back to the Manhattan Project, which was established to build the atomic bomb. Before the DOE existed, energy policy was scattered across a dozen different agencies with no real coordination. But then, in 1973, with the oil embargo from OPEC, which caused an energy crisis, Washington needed to come up with a plan. By 1977, President Carter decided it was time to centralize America's energy strategy, and the DOE was born. Its mission at the time was to make the U.S. less dependent on foreign oil, manage nuclear weapons, and oversee energy research. But with that little bit of history, let's welcome our guest, Jeremiah Mosteller, who is the Policy Director for Americans for Prosperity and may now hold the record for the most guest appearances on the American Potential Podcast. Welcome again, Jeremiah.
David, I am so honored. This is exciting, and I'm looking forward to continuing this series with you.
Yeah. Well, hey, we've talked about you're a well-traveled man. So talking in the theme of the Department of Energy's history, that it goes back to the Manhattan Project. In all your travels, have you ever been to visit any of the Manhattan Project sites?
Yeah, so David, I saw the movie Oppenheimer, and so all those sites now are on my bucket list. Sadly, I've only been to Morgantown, West Virginia, where they had a manufacturing facility where they created what is called heavy water, which goes into the bombs. And so they would develop it there and then send it off to the other facilities for testing. But I know you're in Chicago or outside of Chicago, and the University of Chicago was a big deal for that project. Have you ever visited that site and learned anything about it?
I have not, actually. I've been to the University of Chicago, but I've never been to the Manhattan Project site there. I believe under the football stands or something at the time. But, however, I did visit a site in Nevada where they did surface testing of atomic bombs. So we were on a bus, and you weren't allowed to get off the bus because the sand and soil was so radioactive, and there were blown out structures and stuff like that. It was really cool. It was while we were touring Yucca Mountain, which is the nuclear waste storage site, which was so controversial forever, which was just out in the middle of nowhere, and it was really pretty fascinating. So I do hope to get to some of the other sites. I think we've shared. I go to New Mexico a fair amount for our work, and Los Alamos is there, one of the key sites. So I do plan to get there, but not many of the others though. So we'll put that on the list too.
Well, we need to make an excuse to go to New Mexico together at the same time and then go visit.
There we go, man. We could podcast from there.
That's a great idea.
American Potential.
Hey, producer.
Yeah, excellent. Well, all right. So getting back to our topic, Department of Energy, can you explain just how big the department is?
Yeah. Well, David, I brought my whiteboard again. Is it okay if I show you on the whiteboard just so viewers can kind of get a better sense of how big it is?
Is it okay? Come on, please.
So, David, yes, the Department of Energy, or DOE, as you said, has a budget of $153 billion. So that's actually one of the smaller budgets that we've seen for agencies so far, because it's under 1% of the federal budget. But don't let that deceive you. The amount of money should not deceive you with how confusing it is. So the DOE actually has dozens of offices and sub-agencies that make up the Department of Energy, but they're generally kind of split into 3 different buckets. This isn't how it's functionally structured, but generally all of the departments kind of fall into 3 areas. So there's infrastructure, which is the Grid Deployment Office, for example, and the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. So focused on clean energy, which is interesting. There's also a research arm, as you mentioned, with the labs. And so underneath that, there's the Office of Science and the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, which we have talked about ARPA in another department previously. So this is essentially a similar subunit, but for energy. And then last but not least, there's the nuclear portion of the Department of Energy, which includes both the Office of Nuclear Reactors and the Office of Naval Reactors, as well as the Office for Nuclear Non-Proliferation. So interestingly enough, not only does the military oversee our nuclear arsenal, but so does the Department of Energy. But they also, that same leadership oversees an effort to reduce the number of nuclear missiles around the world. So it seems like there might be a tad bit of a conflict of interest there, but I'm not sure. We don't have to dig too deep into that, but that was just a surprising finding as we were digging into this agency on my team.
Yeah, it does seem to be a bit of a dichotomy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully, we haven't had a giant nuclear war yet, so maybe it's working a little bit. Don't know if that's quite the measure, but so there's also something called the Power Marketing Administration. What is that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The Department of Energy runs a marketing firm, essentially. So the Power Marketing Administration, or PMA, is actually a sub-department that kind of falls under the infrastructure arm of the Department of Energy. And their job is to market hydroelectric power that is generated by 2 different agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers, being one of them, to electric utilities. And so there are 4 regional extensions of this agency that provide power to 34 states.
So why does hydroelectric power kind of need to be marketed by our government to other entities?
So if you look at the history of the agency, the justification for its creation was, hey, we have all of these hydroelectric dams that are being built by the Army Corps of Engineers and other parts of the federal government that are producing power, even though the dams are being built for flood control or irrigation. So they're not being built for power, but hey, while we're building them, let's throw some hydroelectric technology in them. Let's create some power. But we need to have a way to get rid of that power and to use that power. And so the PMA comes in, it builds electric utility lines to connect with the entire grid, and then markets this electricity to utilities and co-ops across the country as a power source that they can use and then sell ultimately to the consumer. I think an interesting fact that we discovered as we were investigating this agency was that there is a federal law requiring it to sell this electricity to the utilities at the lowest possible rate, regardless of how much they're charging the final consumer for this hydroelectric power. So it's a very interesting situation where they're not being able to sell it at market rates, but then the utilities are then turning around and selling this low-cost power to the consumer at market rates.
Well, it's also odd. Why would you need to market if you're actually giving a great deal to the utilities there? We can talk about also how utilities are taking advantage of a program there. I mean, if I'm a utility, I'd be on the lookout for as much of this power as I could get because I'd be able to sell it at a higher profit.
Yeah.
Wow. What's the annual budget of this?
Yeah. So the annual budget is $7.25 billion. Though I do want to note that this is a unique agency in that almost all of its operating costs every single year, they actually generate through their own revenue. Okay. So through all this power they're marketing and through the fees that they collect on that, they're able to kind of collect a lot of their revenue. But let me be clear, that's not the capital cost of maintaining the electric grids and all of that. Congress still is having to appropriate money for that. So this budget includes both that operating cost and the capital costs, with some of that operating cost coming back as far as revenue. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, which is interesting, this agency's activities are actually overseen by another agency, the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission. Okay. So this is kind of like a Russian nesting doll situation where you have like one agency overseeing and marketing power created by multiple other agencies that is then overseen by another agency. So you have like this kind of like stacking on of bureaucracy happening with this particular circumstance, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great image.
Yeah.
So my understanding is in 2024, the Department of Energy was audited. What were those findings?
Yeah, so the Office of the Inspector General, which is kind of controls the audits and oversight of all of that, they actually found that there was $814 million that was most likely misspent by the agency in 2024. And that came from a variety of different audits of different subunits and programs. So that's kind of compiling all of those failures into one sum. But ultimately, what they actually resulted in, all these investigations resulted in 9 criminal charges and convictions, 13 civil investigations, and 23 administrative investigations whenever they found this improper spending. So that means there are lots of employees across the agency that are then seeing administrative, civil, or criminal penalties brought against them because of their actions for this improper spending.
Yeah, that's concerning. You know, I'm super appreciative that folks are digging into this, and really appreciative that DOGE writ large is really kicking up a lot more in this space, because I think it's one of the reasons we're applauding it and spending so much time on our podcast to talk about these issues. Yeah. It's a great refocusing to kind of see, how taxpayer dollars are being spent, and how regulations play a role in our government and how they affect taxpayers. So going back to the Department of Energy, have they had any other issues with audits?
Yeah, so this appears to be a series of failures on the part of the agency. In 2023, there was $46 billion found to have been proven to be misspent by the agency, as well as the Inspector General also publicly shamed the entire agency for failing to do annual audits that they're supposed to do of all of the folks receiving grant money from the Department of Energy. So they were giving the money, but never actually following up to make sure the money was being spent on the right purposes. So, I mean, I would say to Congress and to DOGE, you need to take a closer look at DOE, because the Inspector General essentially laid out a guidebook of like, here's where you need to look for problems.
Yeah, well, sorry. So other than just like more responsible spending, what are some other what are some other steps that DOE could help to get kind of taxpayers' interest?
Well, there's definitely some programs that we think are not justified or that are flawed enough that they need to end. We talked about some last time, the 2 electric vehicle charging grant programs that are run with the Department of Transportation. But there's actually another one that is focused on funding conversion of manufacturing facilities from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicle cars. And it's interesting when you start digging into this program, what you see is that a lot of these facilities were already shuttered or were announced to be shuttered because the corporation had decided that it was no longer economically viable to maintain these facilities. So who you see this money going to is, for example, General Motors getting $500 million, as well as domestic companies like Harley Davidson and Cummins that produces engines. But you also see a lot of European car companies like Stellantis, Mercedes, and Volvo getting money, with Stellantis getting almost $600 million to convert some of their facilities. But what's very interesting is almost every single one of these companies in the past year, so post this program being launched and their awards being given, and today, that they are actually pulling back on their electric vehicle production and cell lines. So, I mean, there's no better proof here that the federal government is investing money in something that the market is not able to sustain at the end of the day. And so from my perspective, I won't speak on behalf of our organization, but I'll speak on my perspective. This feels like it's just another bailout to big corporations who bought in on the electric vehicle vision that was being pushed by the Biden administration and almost forced on them. And now we're actually going to turn around to bail them out to actually make sure that we can maintain this vision going forward, even though the market is not supporting it.
Yeah, I think, I even remember back to the Obama administration, there was, you had Solyndra and other examples of just green energy kind of boondoggles. But on the one hand, I'm a little sympathetic to businesses that they were reading the tea leaves, like this is what is being pushed on us and what we're being almost sometimes mandated to do. Yeah. On the other hand, business also tends to make the, at least big business and interests tend to help create the environment and take advantage of those environments. So it's like, well, okay, let's give us a little bit of a bailout here or there to make it a little easier. Unfortunately, that doesn't usually materialize for the small guys, the folks who actually create most of the jobs and drive our economy. Somehow they get left behind. So, all right. So with these cuts, we have a running tally of cuts for our Doge series. So with these cuts, and in addition to the cuts that we've already made in this series, what's our total? Yeah.
So if Congress was to step in and say, we're going to end this program, that's $2 billion that we can return to the taxpayer. And so that would bring us up to a total of $549.5 billion in total savings this entire series so far. It's a lot of money.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it is a lot of money. I think so, especially if you're hanging around Washington, D.C. too long. I mean, state capitals too, but especially D.C., the dollar amounts are pretty astronomical. But I mean, I think we're talking over $500 billion at the moment.
That's right.
That is not nothing. I mean, that's a lot of money that can make, I mean, the number of issues that we could address and solve if we redeployed that money, or the amount of relief that average taxpayers could experience. Yeah, it's a substantial thing. So if people want to have ideas for more cuts, where can they go to submit those?
Yes. I feel like a broken record on this, David, but we really want people to do this.
We never get sick of it, Jeremiah.
That's right.
Never.
DogeIdea.com is where we want to see people go, because we want to hear your ideas. My team of over 30 policy experts wants to hear from you to figure out what those good ideas are, so that we can then take those to Congress and the administration and say, American people are calling for these cuts. Here's some really cool, innovative ideas. We believe the best ideas are bottom up and come from the American people. And so that's why we created this portal to solicit their ideas.
That's great. Well, thanks again, as always, Jeremiah, for coming on. I know we're going to have you on another episode because we keep talking about this topic. It's top of mind, of chatter around the nation, really, especially in our nation's capital. And, it's certainly important to us at Americans for Prosperity and the American Potential podcast to, keep pushing on this issue and getting it right. So I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Yeah. Looking forward to chatting with you as well.
Nice. Well, hey, like Jeremiah said, we want to hear your ideas of what should be cut. So be sure to go to DogeIdea.com. If you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.